Lifelong experiencer on an ongoing journey of discovery, trying to make some sense of the strange events that have happened to him. 20 years ago, his journey led him to the Mutual UFO Network, where he became an active member and has been state director of the Michigan chapter for the past 10 years, doing his best to uncover what clues he can about the UFO abduction phenomena for those like himself who have had first-hand contact experiences. Konkolesky is a regular lecturer at conferences, public libraries, and other venues. His personal abduction experiences have been featured on Sci-Fi's Abduction Diaries and ABC's UFOs Seeing is Believing, and he has served as a consultant for numerous cable programs, including History Channel's UFO Hunters and Discoveries Uncovering Aliens. His book, Experiencer, Raised in Two Worlds, reveals what his childhood was like, growing up as a normal little boy who discovered that, despite what parents may say, sometimes the monsters are real indeed. Yep. His presentation this afternoon picks up at a point in his life after the events of his book, when he entered young adulthood to discover that, surprisingly, aliens sometimes took a very serious interest in the directions of the personal lives of experiencers, and shockingly, time itself is not always what it seems. I want to add to this prepared introduction the fact that Bill and I met when some years back. He was kind enough to invite me out to give a talk for Michigan MUFON, and a more private one for people training to be investigators. I had a wonderful weekend. He was a marvelous host. We became good friends, and I read his book, Experiencer Raised in Two Worlds. I've read a number of books by experiencers, and most of them are not by trained writers. They're by people giving you their heart and soul and communicating their experiences to you. I can't think of a better one that I've ever read. It's extraordinarily balanced, and one of the few where the writer discusses with equal emphasis the positive experiences he had and the less than positive experiences. He's somebody I'm proud to call a colleague and a good friend, and we're lucky to have him here, Bill Konkolesky.
Oh, thank you, Peter. I don't know how I can live up to your introduction of me.
Do your best. Do your best.
Thank you. Okay, here's the sound again. Okay. First, yes, I am Bill Konkolesky, and my presentation does deal with a lot of time anomalies that I had during a roughly five-year period of my early 20s. Though the first thing I want to actually come out and say about time is what a wonderful time I've had here so far this weekend. This is a fantastic conference. I am so grateful to Audrey Hewins and the Starborn team for allowing me to come out and share with you, and it's been great meeting people, not just locally, but of course from places like England, Peru, Canada. It's been a great time this weekend. Also, kind of want to lead in with just a funny thing that happened about a month ago. It was the most recent high strangeness thing that happened to me, so what the heck, I'll bring it up. I was in bed. It was very early in the morning, well before I was supposed to get up for work, and a thought pushed into my head while I was dreaming, and this is not unusual. The entities often communicate to me like that in a receptive state. I think it's something along the lines that Nancy was describing earlier. There is a flexibility of your mind when you're in that dream state to be able to receive information and messages. So while I was laying there in bed, this thought pushed into my head that said, you can't stop us from landing in your backyard. And that was the whole message. And then I woke up. I'm like, what the heck was that? And I felt that residue in the immediate room where I could tell something had just happened, but I had no memory of it. And so I slipped back to sleep, and a few hours later I got up for work. And with that thought still in my head, I'm like, wait a second, what the heck was that? So I walk downstairs and I look out into my backyard to see the new swing set, big swing set we just put up, my wife and I just put up in the backyard for the kids, and all of their toys littered all over the yard. I'm like, oh, I get it. You know, so they think that, kind of like, I guess, how you put those little things on roasts to keep the pigeons from landing, that we constructed this thing in the backyard maybe to keep them from landing, so. Okay, so I've jumped through some of the hoops that people sometimes ask about. Have you taken Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Index? Yes, and it proved that I was not fantasy prone. Also, about a decade ago, I was part of a sleep study that was from Wayne State University in the Detroit area where I'm from. And they had me sleep for 3 nights in their hospital, wired up like crazy. And they wanted to monitor my sleep patterns to see if there was possibly anything that could have been causing my experiences that was based on some sort of sleep disorder, hypnagogic, hypnopompic stuff. And so they had a group of self-identified experiencers, several of them. I never met anybody else in the study that was a test subject, just the people that were running it. So they had a group of us, self-identified experiencers, sleep 3 nights in the hospital, and all wired up, and where they monitor us. And they had a control group as well. And they did the same thing to them to see if there was any difference. And at the end of the study, they came to me and they said, well, the simple answer is that there's nothing wrong with your sleep pattern. But we've been hesitant to want to tell you, but thought maybe, what the heck, we should, is that in fact, your sleep was better, not only than all the rest of the experiencers, but all the rest of the control group. I had the best sleep pattern of anybody there in that study. Okay, and I also want to express a deep gratitude for the Mutual UFO Network. As was said in my introduction, I have been a member now for more than 20 years, and for the last 10 of them, I've been the state director of Michigan. I bring this picture up too for another couple good reasons too. The woman on your right, behind that gentleman that's the anchor of the right hand of the picture, she is Shirley Coyne. She has now left this world, but during a time in my early 90s when I went to MUFON to uncover some of what happened to me, she took me through a series of regressions, half a dozen regression sessions. One of those sessions becomes very important to the narrative that I have here this afternoon. So please keep her in mind. Also, the gentleman behind her, Dan Wright, I often consider him sort of my UFO dad. He's been my mentor in investigating the UFOs, and he's been a wonderful source of information and support over the years. I also want to say I think it's really cool that I'm at least the third person that's bringing him up this weekend. So I think that stands testament to what a great job he's done over the years. He's now retired from the UFO business, but we still keep in touch. He also is important in this and that for many years he ran the support group for our local MUFON group. Experiencers would come and of course share their stories, and we had a therapist with us as well. And it was wonderful, supportive, and it helped me tremendously. I cannot overstate. I cannot overstate how much he was of assistance. And after he left MUFON, I picked up the reins of holding and hosting the support groups for Michigan. And the groups continue, and it's been very helpful for our local community of experiencers in the Detroit area. And it's only building, and it's been very successful, and we keep going strong with that. So I've been waiting a long time to tell this story, because I can't just go to the person on the street. I have difficulty even amongst some individuals in the UFO community, to be able to tell this story, because it is just so flat out bizarre that unless you've got some sort of vested interest, some background in the abduction phenomena, some of this stuff is just so bizarre that you can't really talk about it easily. And yes, some of the things I'm going to talk about in this span of time that covers about 4 years of my life includes time travel, being subjected to a time loop, being taken from time itself, and then also evidence that the ETs sometimes take a serious interest in the trajectories of the personal lives of experiencers. Now, this last part here, I bring up because in my presentation, you're going to hear a lot of personal details from my lives at the time. Friends I had, girls I dated, and you wonder why he's bringing all of this stuff up. I am not doing it to simply wax nostalgic. All of the characters I put on the playing field here play a part in what seems to be a very directed plan from the ETs to direct or at least support the course of my life over a short period of time. I feel my life has sort of fallen. I put it into 4 different phases. My first phase and my second phase are things that are covered in my book, Experiencer Raised in Two Worlds. And I say the title Raised in Two Worlds because, of course, I was a normal little boy growing up with a normal-ish life, but at the same time, I also had these high strangeness experiences going on with me. So in respect to that, the first phase of my life, the beings were very playful with me. They wanted to be my friends. It was all very nice. The second phase of my life, going into my teen years, is a period where things were a lot harder for me. They would often take me without much regard to how I felt about it. It was very scary, and I had a tough time with it. Then I went into the adult path, as I like to call it, where I formed, what I'm going to do with my life, who I'm going to be with my life, that sort of thing, and that's the main feature of what I'll be discussing today. The fourth phase is the outreach, which is connecting, networking with other people that have this type of experience or interest in this type of experience. So, the first phase of my life, of course, that's me. Hey, kindergarten. Nice bruise on my cheek, I'm sure I got that from playing, not anything weird, but... So during this phase of my life, I'll start with my very first memory. This is my very, very, very first memory in life at age 2. So this isn't a memory that came back to me several years later. This isn't anything that I doubted for a while. This happened to me very explicitly, and it burned in my mind, and I never forgot it. It was the middle of the night. I was laying in my crib. This little gray guy comes up, just looks down at me, and I scream for my parents. My parents tell me to go back to sleep, and the little gray guy walks out of my room. And several years later, I'm jumping over a lot of the stuff that I said is covered in my book, where the aliens took an interest in me and seemed to be very playful. They had a very specific interest in when I would leave my body, which I sometimes did unexpectedly and without meaning to do so. When I was very little, they tried to teach me how to operate outside of my body. And while I could never really fully put my finger on it, all through my life there's been episodes that any time that I've had an astral experience, they're always there. They're always very concerned about it. At age 7, this is the cover of my book, I got a scar on my arm. I was brought on board and they cut my arm. I don't know why they did it. They sat me in a chair. I received this slice on my arm. As I looked down, it healed right before my eyes. And while I was sitting there in a chair, the being that was in front of me, which is one of the taller gray beings, I've seen many of the little gray beings in my life, also several of the taller grays. The taller gray says to me, "Oh, be very good, and you get to see the color blue." I'm like, blue, you know, kids like suckers and maybe toys, stickers, that kind of a thing. But you're going to treat me by showing me the color blue. Well, after I got my arm cut and I looked up into the eyes of this being with its deep black eyes, they suddenly lit up a bright electric cerulean blue, and it was really mesmerizing, really calming, and got me through the experience. And the next day, during broad daylight, me and a little friend of mine were out playing in the backyard of my house, climbing trees, when this mist rolled through the backyard. In this mist was a little gray being that came up to me and asked me if I was all right, telepathically, and I said I was, and then it continued on its way. The next phase of my life, the education and experimentation, is when they really didn't seem to care. They didn't want to play with me. They didn't want to necessarily give me any treats. They would very forcefully take me from bed in the night and take me on board. And I would be laying there. I would see lights, sometimes nausea, sometimes I would have bloody noses, but never really certain what they were doing. And part of that, I knew that they were feeding me with some information. It was force feeding me with some sort of knowledge that they said that it wasn't the right time for me to remember. And guess what? I never figured out what it was that they were trying to tell me. For what it's worth, in this picture, just to show you what a unusual household I had, we have Coke and Pepsi there on the table. And no, I didn't smoke. That was me. I was a good kid. So, how bad was my teen years? Extremely, extraordinarily traumatic some of the time. Once I was brought before a mantis being that was probably over 7 feet tall, very terrifying, very menacing. It had this vibe that felt like it could just simply eat my soul. And it gave me the message to just basically play along. Don't question, just follow the rules and I'll be okay. And it was like being brought in front of the principal at the high school in a way, I guess. But yeah, this was a very, very scary experience. In fact, I was brought aboard so often during my teen years that I had sort of a self-defense system set up in my bedroom. This is a very nice map of my bedroom. So starting from the door, I would wedge a drumstick between the dresser and the door so that the door would only open so far, and once the door hit a certain point it would make a knocking sound. And then I set the ceiling fan on the floor, floor fan right there in front of the door, and it turned that on so that if I closed my eyes but felt something move in front of the fan, I would wake up because I knew somebody was in the room. Also, I either had the TV or the radio on, usually the TV, always had the light on. The curtains, I always kept closed so that they couldn't recon me by looking through the window. And, And then also, the dog, the family dog, I always invited her in to stay with me. And then my floor was just an absolute mess with papers, books, tapes, just everything all over the floor. And as much as my parents, my mother in particular, was supportive of me saying that unusual things were happening, I could never convince her that the reason I had a messy room was simply to keep the grays away. In 1989, I was a high school senior at the time. So yeah, that means I'm in my mid-40s. Somebody earlier this weekend said they thought I was in my 20s, which I guess means I could be my own dad. But so I was with a couple of friends in my senior year, and we had seen a pretty dramatic UFO event where a blue UFO flew slowly over our car, beautiful, gorgeous color blue. And then a white light then came and zigzagged across the entire expanse of the sky, and then that disappeared, and then a red light came on and off in the middle of the sky. And I bring this up because I don't know that this is the most recent version of my presentation, but that's cool, it works. I can play along with it. So the guys that you see in this picture are my closest friends from that point in time. Everybody's name that I bring up from this point is a pseudonym. The From left, that's Herb, Kyle, me, and my friend Don. Kyle and Don were with me when we saw this UFO event, and all of these individuals play a part in what would happen next in my life, in my adult path. There was a turning point where I think that everything changed from just simply being an abductee. That's what I was in my teen years. I was an abductee. I was abducted, I was taken against my will, never had a good time with it, and lost a whole lot of sleep, and it really, really traumatized me. But a funny thing happened as I got out of high school. One night, UFO, well, I'll start from the beginning. I was in the kitchen, it was very late at night, and I knew they were in the backyard, that the Grays had come and that they were in the backyard. I couldn't see them, but their signature, their presence is unmistakable. The air was thick with their energy, and I said out loud, if you're here, I don't want to see you. I would prefer some other way that you contact me. Maybe could you use the phone? It was worth a try, right? So after I said that aloud, and I'm giving you the edited version, this is still stuff that's in my book from this point, and I think the book describes it in a lot more detail. So I said, if anybody's here, I just want you to call me, and sure enough, the phone rang just like that. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I ran and I grabbed the phone, nobody was there, I hung up, I'm like, now what? But the crazy thing was that the energy then faded, and I felt comfortable. I'm like, okay, I think they're gone, but still, I want to get my dog. Now, my dog would look like Benji, just this little tiny thing, but, it's a dog, she's my companion. I'll, get her and have her with me and maybe feel a little bit better. So I got the family dog, and then when I got her, I didn't realize that getting the dog she always interprets that as a trigger of, oh, we're going outside, we're going for a walk. I'm like, no, we're not leaving this house. We're not going to leave this house. And she's running around by the front door. We're going to go outside. We're going to go outside. And I'm thinking, well, if she's not feeling any sort of fear about the situation, maybe they are gone. Maybe it is safe. And so she and I went outside. She normally goes into the backyard when we just let her out. But I'm like, no, let's go in the front yard. So we walked out into the front yard, and I saw it was a very clear sky. And there was only one thing in the sky, which was a disc-shaped cloud directly over the house. And it was just hovering there. I'm like, is that a UFO? Well, it looks like a cloud, but it was very perfectly sculpted. It wasn't fluffy, and it seemed to be illuminated, but I couldn't tell what was illuminating it. Coming to the conclusion that it was probably somehow self-illuminating. And then it started to drift slowly against the direction that the wind was going, and it picked up speed and then shot off. So the next day, it took me a long time to get to sleep that night, but the next day, my friend Kyle came over, and he said, hey, our friend John, and this is part of that weird, awkward, personal stuff that becomes important. He says, our friend John is going to have a birthday party in a couple weeks. And I said, okay, and I told him about the UFO event from the previous night. He and I were very open about it. He's had his own experiences. And I asked him, here's Kyle, who came over the next day, and friend John, who had the birthday party coming up. So I asked him, is it possible that Vicki is going to be there, who's a friend amongst our group of friends? And he said, why do you want to know that? Are you thinking of hooking up with her? And I'm like, she and I are going to be boyfriend and girlfriend. And he's like, oh, he's like, oh, you're going to make some play? I'm like, no. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, I never really thought of her as somebody I would date. And I'm not thinking I'm going to try to get with her, but we are. I said, at that party, she and I will become a couple. And it was just some unusual thing that somehow I knew, just knowing, and I felt that it somehow had to do with the experience that I'd had the evening before. So, yeah, so she and I dated for quite a while, about a year, which is a lot for that time of your life, I guess. But it was the most serious relationship I'd had at the time. She often said we were going to get married. I didn't see that that wasn't necessarily going to happen. So I thought, okay, yeah, this is, here we go. We're, getting going with my life mate here, sort of a thing. And things took a very dramatic turn at the beginning of January of 1991. I was walking down a rural road. It was, of course, winter, and it was up north in Michigan. I could tell the cold was very, very biting, and I wasn't very well dressed. And as I'm telling it this way for a specific reason, and I'm walking down the road, and I'm like, what the heck am I doing here? And I'm like, where did I just come from? What's going on? And I got really confused. I'm like, this isn't right. And I could tell, that obviously I had just walked from somewhere. I could see my footprints, but I'm like, what the heck am I doing? So I see I see a pickup truck up ahead and what appears to be a house. So as I walk up to the house, I look over, and a little gray guy is standing there, and suddenly our eyes locked, and his eyes lit up a bright, shiny, supernova white, and it felt like it was sucking my essence. It was awful. I felt every negative emotion that I had ever felt. It was just this terrible, we're talking rage, guilt, sorrow, pain, just everything. I was racked with every possible negativity, and I felt like I was being eaten alive, and that I felt that I had died. And then, what's the next slide? Okay. This will become important in a moment. So anyway, I'll just leave it up. So, then the next thing that happened was I woke up in my bed. And it was 2 p.m. in the afternoon. There was a knock on the door. My mother came in, because I was still living at home at the time, I was 20, and she drops this letter on my chest and walks out of the room and leaves. And I'm completely drenched in sweat. I'm like, I was there. That wasn't a dream. I was just there. There was no sense of anything vaguely dreamlike about it. It was completely, utterly, and entirely real where I had been, and now I was completely someplace else. And I sat there in shock, laid there in shock for several minutes, and then I looked down, I'm like, oh yeah, there's this letter on my chest. So I look at it, and it's from Vicki, and this was a Monday, because that becomes important in a second. I opened the letter, and it's a Dear John letter, basically saying, oh, we had a great time, but, I need to do my own thing for me, and whatever. And all I kept thinking was the creature, in that dream. And so I'm reading the letter, Dear Bill is great, blah, 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 blah. You can call me if you want. And I'm like, okay, an imperative, something to do, call girl. Okay, get up, call girl. And I'm just thinking, the creature. And so I hop on the phone with her, and Vicki answers, and she's like, hi, and I say, yes. She's like, is this Bill? I'm like, yes. Oh, did you get my letter? Like, oh, I'm like, yes. And I'm just thinking, the creature. I was completely numb and anesthetized to everything else in my life. I was still dealing with what had just happened to me. And she goes, well, I sent that out on Friday, and we had such a good time over the weekend that I've changed my mind. Can we just kind of forget about that letter? And I'm just thinking, the creature. I'm not even there in a conversation with her. I just know she asked me a yes or no question. I said yes. So she's like, so can you come over tonight? I'm like, yes. And she's like, normal time, 7? I'm like, yes. And she's like, all right, bye. I'm like, yes. And that was the whole phone call. And I just stood there, and I'm like, what on earth? It was just, and it was several hours later. obviously, that I went and drove to meet up with her. And I was still in a daze over what had happened. We got together, and we're sitting there, just kind of lazily, our arms around each other. And then it hit me. I'm like, what the heck did she just do? She sent me this letter, breaking up, and backtracked, and now I'm in her arms. I'm like, that is crazy. So I said, okay, I'm not gonna make decisions tonight. I'm just going to go on with it. And things did actually normalize with herself and me. And I thought, well, I did actually accept her back into the relationship. So, okay, that's fine. Let's keep going and see where this goes. We ended up breaking up about another 8 months later. And shortly after that, in the month of November, I call it my autumn apocalypse. It was my thing back then. I thought, oh, that's so cool. I got this cool name for this bad stuff that was about to happen to me. But so, in the course of a couple weeks, like literally 2 weeks, first of all, my friend Kyle says, and he again is the second one in from the left. He says, he goes, I want to tell you something. That right when you broke up with Vicki, she and I kind of dated for 2 months, and it was like right away. I'm like, you didn't tell me that? I'm like, that's so weird. And he goes, yeah, well, we broke up, so I decided to tell you. I'm like, and this group of friends, I cannot tell you how tight we were. It's that kind of a thing where you see a group of friends and they have their own coded language and. They're always together, and, we were that type of group of friends. So this was extraordinarily painful for me, and I'm like, okay. And then you could tell the guilt was weighing on him. He's like, but it's not as bad as what Herb and Don did. And I'm like, oh. And they were like, yeah, they were kind of seeing her while you were seeing her. I'm like, these are my 3 best friends in the whole world. And so I'm like, this is just terrible. And so as I went reaching out to other friends in this particular group of friends, and we had a fairly large halo of friends around us, every single friend that I contacted said, yeah, I kind of knew about that, but didn't want to tell you, didn't want to be the one to tell you. I'm like, how many parties were she and I at where everybody knew and I didn't know? So I was feeling pretty terrible about that. At the time, I was dating a different girl, and she called and said, she actually left me for a younger man, strangely, but she was only a couple of years younger than me, but okay, whatever, that was fine. She and I weren't dating that long. And then my parents, they tell me that they were going to divorce, which was a big surprise to me. I knew that they were going through kind of a rough spot, but didn't imagine them ever divorcing. And they said, well, so my mom's like, yeah, we're splitting up, so that means, of course, that we're all going to have to move out of this house, the only house that I've ever lived in my whole life. So I'm like, okay, let me think of all of my support systems. The family, well, that's not really there at the moment because they're splitting apart. The very home I live in, okay, I'm going to have to move out of that. My girlfriend, oh wait, that one just broke up. Okay, my good dear friends, I'm like, oh yeah, and that's the worst of it. So suddenly I was just left without any sort of support system at all. And then the hammer really hit when I was a young college student at the time, and I learned about determinism from the B.F. Skinner, the whole cause and effect, people have no freedom of choice, maybe in Buddhist lingo, dependent arising, that whole sort of thing that you can't really blame anybody. I'm expressing it this way because it's meaningful in this situation. You can't really blame anybody for anything they've done because they're just the victim of circumstance. It's how they were raised, and certain situations come up. Like, okay, there were things that I didn't know about my parents, and that's why they were divorcing. And the reason that my friends did all this stuff to me was because that's the way the universe played the cards in their life, and I can't really blame them for what they did. And that philosophy, that line of thinking, just completely paralyzed me. I'm like, I can't be upset with anybody for anything that they've done, and I can't say that anything is particularly bad about this because it's all a matter of circumstances. And of course, I was raised Catholic, well not of course, but I was, and so, you know, Catholics don't divorce, but my parents were, and the whole determinism thing went very much against cause and effect. It went against good and evil. So I was severely messed up. And then I started to think about, I'll get to this in just a second too. So I started to think about that situation I had back when I first received that Dear John letter with the little gray being. And I thought, were they trying to warn me about this event? Because right now, I gotta tell you, I feel like I had every possible negative emotion just sucked right out of me, and I don't know what to do, and I'm in a really rough spot. And so I dwelled on that for a while, and eventually, not long after, is when I hooked up with MUFON and started the hypnotic regressions. And on the sixth and what would be the last hypnotic regression that I had with Shirley Coyne in 1994, this is the part that relates to stepping outside of time. Instead of the normal regression session that we would have, she lived in a trailer in Flushing, Michigan, and she had a room. It was a nice one, and there was a room set up specifically for her. That was her office and for regressions. So I sat in the chair that I normally sat in to look back at various things that had happened in my life that were ET related. And this particular time, though, was different. As I sat there, instead of that normal feeling I had of sinking into the chair, I felt as if I was levitating, that I was floating up into the air. And everything became very crisp white around me. I felt like the walls of the trailer fell apart in all directions, the ceiling flew up, and that I flew up an immense and unimaginable distance into this place that had no sense of space, time, anything. It was just this whiteness everywhere. And I could still vaguely hear Shirley's voice say, let's go back to something that may have bothered you in your life. And so I went to try to examine different various things that had happened from my childhood, some of which I covered already here. But every time I tried to focus on one, I got a feeling that I would call sort of like a whitewash. It would blur out, it would phase out, that somebody very intentionally was just saying, no, don't look at that. And after trying a number of different events in my life that I knew were ET related and failing because they kept getting consistently whitewashed, I'm like, okay, I give up. All right, what's going on here? And this voice said to me, you keep focusing on the bad things that have happened between us. And you shouldn't do that. You are very concerned about your safety and what will happen to you. And you shouldn't be concerned because from where we are at, we see your entire life as one. We are watching your entire life right now, and you're going to turn out fine. Nothing bad is going to happen to you, so don't worry. And I felt like I dropped very heavily back into the chair, and it felt like I gained like 1,000 pounds. It was just so heavy again in the chair. And I slowly started to move and get out of it, and I opened my eyes and looked, and there was Shirley Coyne. And she's like, oh, there you are. She goes, I kind of lost you for a while there. And so I said, I said, this was really weird. And I told her what happened, and she just stared at me. I'm like, so have you heard that before? Do you know what that is? And she just kind of quietly shook her head no. I'm like, okay. And I got up, and the first thing I had to do once I was able to start flexing my muscles again was I had to get up and go to the bathroom. So I got up and I went down the hall into the bathroom. Her husband was in the next room laying on the couch. And as I was in the bathroom, her husband says to her, he's like, I don't know if we should tell him, but there were 3 of them in here. And she's like, what? 3 what? He goes, what do you think? There were 3 grays that showed up. He goes, shortly after you went in and started your regression session. He goes, and they just left a couple minutes ago. And she's like, what did you do? And I'm in the bathroom listening to this. I'm like, oh my God, it's a trailer, I can hear you. The walls are and so he's like, I just laid here, and they stood there, and he goes, it seemed like they were somehow guarding the place or interested in what you were doing. He's like, what did you do in there? And she's like, well, I started asking him questions, and then he just stopped responding, and then so I started doing other stuff in there, and then he came to again. And so I'm like, okay. So I come out of the bathroom, and I'm like, okay. So I go up to him, and I said, I looked, and they both had this weird look on their face. And I'm like, okay, so what's up? And she's like, nothing. And I'm like, is there something going on? I said, you look concerned. And she's like, oh, no, we were just talking. I'm like, okay. And they never did tell me. I completely overheard their conversation, but she never, and they're both deceased now, God bless them, but they never told me anything about what had happened while I was in there. And I stopped to think, I'm like, yes, this is another one of those situations where I was out of body, wherever I was, and they were keenly interested in what was happening to me. To me, I think that is the trigger, that I had somehow gone out of body and that instantly attracted them. This span of time that I'm covering here in my life, I'm probably telling you about a third of the weird things that happened, but I'm staying on a particular set of circumstances because they follow a particular narrative that I think is important to share. But yeah, there have been many times since in my life where I've been out of body, and that always attracts them.